Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. This segment is presented by Charles Schwab. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining us this afternoon, we have Adam Fish, founder and CEO of Ditto, as well as Hilary Wandall, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Dun Bradstreet. We're here to discuss security by design and why governance must be built into platforms and models from day one. It is great to have the both of you with us. Certainly a key conversation for cybersecurity Awareness Month, which of course takes place each October. Before we get into forward-looking governance, Adam, let's start with the limits of traditional governance. What are some of the hurdles that we're facing now?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I would say, our perspective at Ditto, we work at the edge. And so this is a challenge now for modern companies where governance, when you think about central systems, that could be cloud systems, but it could also be on-prem data centers, something that you have in one location. Governance can be a lot easier, but now the fact that workers and everyone are carrying mobile devices, or increasingly we're using more automated machines, data lives not just in one central place, it lives at the edge. And as a result, the governance has to evolve to support the complexity of those edge systems, which are going to have intermittent connectivity. And as a result, you're going to need different forms of ways to manage that data, keep it secure. And as a result, this has led to new forms of governance to support this.
Right. And Hillary, you and I have discussed this before, but data governance, it really has to come back to resilience at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It needs to look at where a company not only is, but needs to be able to evolve to and what's going on operationally day in and day out. For me personally, Jill, I go back to the precedents that have been set around privacy and data protection law for the last decade or so, particularly with GDPR, businesses needing to know exactly what data they have, where it's coming from, where it's moving to, whether it's in the cloud centralized or whether out on the edge, as Adam said. This is going to be really critical for us, especially with more and more AI agents popping up all over the place.
So, Adam, when you think about edge-centric governance, what would be some strategies that you would look towards, like peer-to-peer as an example?
Yeah, well, companies that are operating with edge systems, whether that's mobile devices or otherwise, that data is getting generated there. And as a result, you got to think about how you can make sure that that data can actually be utilized and properly governed. And so ensuring that devices can stay connected in those environments is critical. And so peer-to-peer connectivity is a capability that can help enable that. Companies that we work with, such as restaurant brands, such as Chick-fil-A restaurants, their business is at a bunch of different franchise locations. It's not just one system that they can centrally manage. And so they need to think about how can they govern that data in an individual location and make sure that it's also still utilized, and enabling those devices to connect directly to each other, so that when the data is generated at the store, such as a customer order, it can get to all those devices directly versus being hindered by a centralized government system that kind of forces it to the cloud is critical for business operations. And so being able to shift from a centralized governance to an edge focused governance can have, huge impacts on businesses, because then they're not held down by that central system.
Right. Hillary, let's go back to the conversation around data governance and the impact of AI. It seems as if some enterprises may have some analysis paralysis there because we're still trying to understand what the operating and regulatory framework is going to look like and how to stay within compliance of that. And then, of course, you have the ethics that need to be built into these models as well.
Yeah, Jill, I think the challenge that so many face is a worry about what is going to be regulated and how is it going to be regulated and how is that going to vary in the different markets around the world. I know there's been a big focus this year on potentially slowing down regulation a bit. My own view is that organizations need to look at this through the ethical lens, as you mentioned, in a more principle-based way to make sure that they're aligned with frameworks like the OECD guidelines around AI, looking at higher level principles for ensuring that there's a good and appropriate risk analysis depending on the kinds of data that's being used, the kind of AI processing that's actually happening on that data, but where it's happening, whether it's happening in a more centralized AI system or, as we've begun to talk about, with agents that are sitting out all over the place. And so I think for many, it's important to not worry about where the regulatory environment may land. It's going to continue to evolve, but it's critical to focus in on what are the opportunities now and how do we manage them effectively based on a good risk analysis and adequate transparency.
Right. And Adam, of course, it comes back to operational continuity at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I was thinking, as Hilary was speaking, like we work with the military, and they have actual legal necessity around, does data get to certain places? Because if you're talking about taking an action in a military context, there are legal frameworks and things that you need to verify that that data is accurate before those actions are taken. And so a minimum is keeping a human in the loop, to be able to add that in terms of the governance. But we are going to go into a world where systems and things need to make actions faster than humans can't. And so being able to have the assurance that those systems are connected and all the governance that's going to be around it can take action on that data is absolutely essential. And so that's where ensuring edge devices can be able to stay connected to each other means whatever the loop is, whether it's a loop that includes a human or even if not, that can go and happen even in these very remote or challenging environments that militaries or even other industries continue to operate in.
Right. And Hilary, that goes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to jump in on that point real quickly, just to the extent that regardless of how data is distributed, it's so critical to know the classification of the data, the categorization of the data, to have good metadata on that data so you can manage and govern it effectively, regardless of where it's being distributed, and knowing that laws and how those laws, to Adam's point again, will apply based on the particular use case, based on where that data is ending up, is key. But if you start with the basics of the categories, the classification, having good metadata on it, it will help you manage that in a flexible, adaptable way.
Right. And that was essentially the question I was going to ask you, because back to your point earlier, if you have unstructured data or poor data governance, you can't afford, to Adam's example with the defense example, you can't stop critical operations just because you don't have a data governance plan in place and understanding how each piece of data is being categorized.
It's more important than ever that organizations that have not necessarily focused on data governance but want to be successful with AI or whatever they want to be successful around in the future, that they understand creating a data governance framework now is essential. If you don't have that foundation, you're going to have a very, very difficult time being able to keep up and compete effectively.
Right. And Adam,
Yeah, Hilary, I totally agree.
I'm sorry. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
I totally agree with that. And some folks might think, oh, governance, like, is this going to slow down innovation? But in the world of AI, governance and classifying data, making sure you've got clean data is also essential in terms of training and improving models. And so if you want to innovate and apply AI, well, you also have to start with good governance. Like, those are interchangeable. Innovation is not hindered by governance. They go one and the same in the world of AI.
Yeah. Adam, I also want to bring it back to security by design from day one, whether it's the model, the strategy. I think when you put it in the context of governance and cybersecurity, that's the competitive advantage. It's not something nice to have or something you have to check off the boxes as it relates to being in compliance. But security by design, I think, is where the competition is going to either lead or you won't participate.
Absolutely. And that's where this evolving nature of having semi-disconnected devices and edge data makes security ever more important, because it is much more leaky for that data to potentially get lost. And so, basics of making sure data is encrypted at rest or data is encrypted over the wire is essential to enabling strong data governance with these edge systems. And as we think about edge AI, that also is important in terms of making sure, like I was mentioning earlier, and Hillary was remarking on classification. If you don't know what the data is, you can't keep it secure because if you mislabel something that is actually protected information, that is not it's not a hacker that leaked it. You could be the one that's accidentally leaking it in the use of developing AI models. And so it's critical to have that good governance from the start.
Right. And Hillary, as well, of course, we have to be mindful of the responsible use of and trying to eliminate bias from the models as well as best can be.
Yeah, and this is one of the hardest challenges I think that many of us face, Jill. I know a big focus right now for many of us in the AI governance space is looking at how do we do appropriate evaluation. And there's evaluations that are done at the model level, but it's really critical to also be doing those evaluations effectively, or evals, as I hear them called more and more, at the system level, and at the agents level now, as more are focused on specific agents working across the system. And so thinking about, firstly, even before we get to bias and fairness, thinking about the accuracy around the data that is coming in, the accuracy of the outputs, making sure that over time, if a system is continually producing results, that it's not drifting in an inappropriate way. That is an area that people are working on doing a better and better job around evaluating that, but it's tough. It's also tough though then to think about, like, how do you appropriately evaluate bias and fairness? They're not one and the same things, but we oftentimes with bias we start with thinking about where there might be potential for discrimination, and most of the way people have thought about it historically is like, do I have any data that's potentially biased? But more importantly, what many are focused on now is, am I getting biased results? And if they are biased, to whom? Is that lawful? Is it, if it's not unlawful, is it potentially unethical? And what does that really mean? It's really forcing a better ethical lens on what is a fair system, what's a fair model, what is a fair result. And I think we're going to see continued focus on being able to define that and evaluate that more consistently.
Yeah. And Hillary, I also wanted to ask you as well, because now management teams are thinking about how they are going to triage their resources. One, you want to invest in, external and internal AI products and emerging technologies to be competitive within the landscape. But then how do you rectify that with the cost that goes into a solid cybersecurity and compliance plan? Because at the, does that upfront cost, does that make sense at the end of the day when it comes to risk mitigation, brand reputation, being able to adapt to environments by investing in this technology now?
Well, I think a basic investment to get started is essential. I think my own view is agile development and trying things, testing and learning. I come from a science background, and so I'm a big fan of the hypothesis testing. You have an idea, invest in the minimum to make it work effectively at that idea level, test it, do your POCs, do additional scaling, and then over time, you can expand it to much more. And depending on exactly how you're approaching it, you may need more upfront investment. But that's where I think the potential return on investment analysis, like what is the potential value we can get out of this, and what is the risk associated with it? I believe that starting with a smaller set of pilots and learning from those and then investing more is probably the best way. We've seen a bit in the news about people who said they were going to invest hugely in AI, but they haven't yet seen the benefits of all of that. And I think part of it, the last point I'll make on this here is, part of it is that not everybody's ready for what it means to them. And in order to have good models and good AI use within organizations, you have to bring the literacy along. You need to help engage the organization so that they feel comfortable adopting AI to do the work that they already are doing today, that they could do it that much better.
Right. Yeah. And Adam, of course, at the end of the day, this is going to build trust and loyalty, and it could also help to create value as well. Sometimes, to Hillary's point, you don't necessarily have to implement certain technologies if there's no problem to solve, or perhaps there's no data or benchmarks to measure it against just yet. So it sometimes it does pay off to be a little bit more deliberate with how you're going to deploy these technologies.
Absolutely. And I was thinking earlier about the comment on bias and thinking also like this is intertwined with decentralization because when we think about a single AI model, well, that could be inherently biased to various groups of people, but being able to enable it to be personalized and based on the end user, that can drive better user experiences, higher customer value, and to do that though it sort of needs to become decentralized. And the ability to deploy AI models at the edge, where you can really incorporate your own personal data into it in a way that's protected, is a good way to do that. And in the process, though, you will also build a more resilient system because there is not a single point of failure anymore. And so that's something we think about a lot at Ditto, but I also think it's very relevant when you're thinking about data governance and potential biases with AI models. Is how can you enable these to be protected, but also personalized in the right way so those biases don't creep in?
All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.